Lizzie's back hit the cold marble wall. Her breath was shaking. Somewhere down the hallway, a door slammed, and a voice she didn't recognize said her name like it was already a verdict. She doesn't leave this house until the debt is settled. Gongbin stood between her and the voice. His shoulders were rigid. His jaw was tight enough to crack. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. Lizzie could feel it, the exact moment he stopped being the man who whispered her name in the dark and became the man his family had raised him to be. "Touch her," he said low, "and you'll answer to me."
Not to the family.
Me. Lizzie pressed her palm against her own chest, like she could hold her heart in place. 3 months ago, she didn't know this man's real name. She only knew his face, printed, glossy, silent, safe. A poster on a wall. Something she could love without consequence. She never imagined the poster would answer back. Welcome to AfroSeoul Connect. On today's episode, you'd get a dose of culture clash, forbidden love, family pressure, second chances, and an unforgettable reunion. If this is your first time here, make sure to like, subscribe, and click the notification icon so you never miss a new story when it drops. And don't forget to send this story to a friend or family member you think would love it. Also, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd really love to know. Now, let's dive back into this amazing story. 3 months earlier, Lagos was loud in the way it always was. Generators humming, hawkers calling out prices, her mother's voice tired from a 12-hour hospital shift. Lizzie Zisa had grown up in that noise. She didn't resent it. She just wanted, quietly, something softer to hold on to. That something was a face.
Gongbin.
Korea's most unreachable man, at least to the world that only saw magazines and screens. She didn't know then what he really was behind the glossy image, didn't know the empire his family ran, didn't know the blood that funded the silence around his name. She just knew the shape of his jaw, the stillness in his eyes, the way he never smiled for cameras like he was daring the world to earn it. So, when the scholarship letter came, full ride, Seoul, business internship, she didn't think twice. She told her mother it was about her future. It was also, quietly, about a face on a wall she'd loved since she was 17. Seoul was colder than she expected, and not just in temperature. The city moved fast, spoke fast, judged fast. She was the only black face in most rooms she walked into, and she felt it. The stares, the whispers, the assumptions people made before she said a word. But she kept her head high. She had a scholarship to prove herself worthy of, and a mother back home counting on her. Her internship placed her inside a media company. One connected, she would later learn, to far more than entertainment. On her second week, lost in a hallway she wasn't supposed to be in, she found a private studio. Empty. Quiet. And on the far wall, a promotional poster, floor to ceiling, of Gongbin himself. She should have turned around. She didn't. She stood in front of it the way she used to stand in front of it at 17, heart racing for no reason she could explain. And before she could stop herself, she leaned in and kissed it.
Soft. Fast.
Foolish. A private ritual from a lonelier version of herself, resurrected in a foreign country, where she suddenly felt very small. Was that good enough? The voice came from behind her.
Real. Low.
Amused, but only barely, like laughter was something rationed carefully. She turned around, and her whole body went cold. He wasn't supposed to be there. But he was Gongbin, in the flesh, close enough to see the shock still burning across her face. Not smiling. Not laughing at her. Just watching, like she was the most unexpected thing that had happened to him in a very long time. Lizzie didn't know it yet, but that studio wasn't just a place he escaped to between schedules. It was one of the only rooms in the building without cameras, the one place he could be unwatched, unguarded, unowned. And she had just walked straight into it. Neither of them said anything for a moment too long. She didn't know he wasn't just an idol behind a corporate machine. She didn't know his family didn't run an entertainment company at all, not really. Entertainment was the mask. What sat underneath it was older, colder, and far more dangerous. She didn't know her own father, years ago, had made a promise to a family like his and broken it. She just knew that the man in front of her felt nothing like the poster. He felt real. And terrifyingly close. What is Gongbin's family really, and why does this room have no cameras? What did Lizzie's father do? And does Gongbin already know? Seoul had a way of hiding its darkest rooms behind its most beautiful buildings. Lizzie learned that slowly, one stolen hour at a time. After the studio, after the kiss she never meant for anyone to see, Gongbin didn't report her. He didn't have her removed from the internship. He didn't do any of the things she braced herself for. Instead, 3 days later, he found her in the building's private garden, where interns weren't technically allowed, and sat down beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You come here every day," he said. "Not a question." "It's quiet," she answered. "I like quiet." "Me too." A pause. "There isn't much of it, where I come from." She didn't ask what that meant. Not yet. She was too busy noticing the way his voice softened when no one else was around, like the coldness the world saw was a coat he only wore outside. Over the following weeks, quiet became a habit, then a rhythm, then something neither of them could call by its real name because naming it made it dangerous. They met in places without cameras, a private elevator, an unused rooftop, a bookstore 2 districts away where no one recognized either of their faces. Gongbin would show up in plain clothes, hood low, and for an hour, he wasn't an heir to anything. He was just a man who listened when she talked about her mother's hospital shifts, who laughed, actually laughed, low and surprised at himself when she teased him for being too serious for someone under 30. And Lizzie, for the first time since arriving in Seoul, didn't feel like the only black face in a room full of quiet judgment. She felt seen, chosen, wanted for exactly who she was. She didn't know, not yet, what it cost him to keep choosing her. The first crack came on a Tuesday. Lizzie was in the office kitchen, chasing down a coffee before a meeting, when she overheard 2 senior staff members speaking low, thinking no one else was around. "The Zisa girl. Gongbin's been seen with her. Does he know who her father was?" Lizzie's hand froze around the coffee cup. "Doesn't matter if he knows," the other voice said. "The family will find out eventually. And when they do..." The voice dropped too low to hear. Lizzie backed out of the kitchen before either of them noticed her, her heart slamming against her ribs. Her father. What did her father have to do with any of this? She thought about calling her mother that night. She didn't. Some part of her, the part that had spent a lifetime protecting her mother from worry, decided to carry the unease alone, at least until she understood it. She didn't tell Gongbin either. Not yet. But he noticed the shift in her anyway. He always did. "You're somewhere else tonight," he said, the next time they met, this time on the rooftop, city lights spread out beneath them like scattered coins. "I'm fine," she said, too fast. He studied her face the way he studied everything, carefully, like a man who'd learned the cost of missing details. "Lizzie, I've spent my whole life around people who lie well. You're not one of them," she almost told him then. The words sat right at the edge of her mouth. Instead, she asked a question of her own. "What is your family, Gongbin? Really? Everyone talks about them like..." She searched for the word. "Like they're afraid." Something shifted behind his eyes. A door closing, gently, before she could see what was on the other side of it. "They're powerful," he said finally. "Powerful people make other people afraid. That's not a secret. That's just how the world works." It wasn't a real answer, and they both knew it. But Lizzie let it go, because the alternative was asking a question she wasn't ready to hear answered, and because, in that moment, with the wind pulling at her hair and his eyes finally soft again, she wanted the fantasy a little longer. She leaned into him instead of pulling away. He didn't stop her. For a few stolen hours that night, the empire waiting behind his name didn't exist. There was only the rooftop, the city glittering below them like it had no idea what it was about to cost them both. What does the staff know about Lizzie's father that Gongbin doesn't? Or does he? The truth arrived the way most devastating things do. Quietly, on an ordinary afternoon, wrapped inside a folder Gongbin wasn't supposed to open. It was his brother, Gong Tae, who left it on his desk. No note. Just a name circled in red ink. Emeka Zisa. Gongbin read the file twice before his hands went still. Years before he was born into the weight of his family's name, a business partnership had collapsed, a Nigerian trade contact who'd taken funding, promises, trust, and vanished before delivering on any of it. The Gong family didn't just lose money. They lost face, in a world where face was currency. The partner's name had been Emeka, Lizzie's father. Gongbin sat with that fact for a long time, the office silent around him, the weight of it pressing down on his chest like something physical. It didn't matter that Lizzie hadn't known. It didn't matter that she'd been a child when it happened, or that she carried none of her father's choices in her own hands. In his family, debts didn't die with the person who made them. They passed down, silent and patient, waiting for the right moment to be collected. And Gongbin had just spent 2 months falling in love with the collection waiting to happen. He didn't confront her immediately. He couldn't. Some cowardly, human part of him wanted one more untouched evening before everything became complicated beyond repair. So he showed up at the bookstore, same as always, and let her talk about her mother's promotion, her homesickness, a memory from her childhood that made her laugh so hard she had to cover her mouth. He watched her like he was trying to memorize her before something took her away. "You're doing it again," she said, catching him staring. "Doing what?" "Looking at me like I'm about to disappear." He almost told her the truth right there. He almost let the whole fragile thing collapse under its own weight, just to stop carrying it alone. Instead, he reached for her hand across the small table, laced his fingers through hers, and said the only true thing he could afford to say out loud. "I don't want you to disappear." She smiled, soft and unaware, and squeezed his hand back, never knowing that behind his eyes, a war had already started. One side of him wanted to protect her from what was coming. The other side knew his family didn't forgive, didn't forget, and didn't ask permission before they acted. The family found out 3 days later. Not through him. Through their own reach, the quiet, invisible network that made the Gong name something people whispered instead of spoke. Gongbin was summoned to his father's study, and the moment he walked in, he knew from the stillness in the room that the conversation would not be one he could talk his way out of. "You've been seeing the Zisa girl," his father said. "Not a question. Never a question in that house. Her name is Lizzie." "Her name," his father said, voice flat as stone, "is the daughter of the man who humiliated this family. And you have been parading her through our own building like it means nothing. It has nothing to do with her. Everything has to do with her. The moment you chose to touch what belongs to a debt this family never collected." Gongbin's jaw tightened. "She's not a debt. She's a person." His father studied him with the particular coldness reserved for disappointment. "Then you have already decided to choose her over your family." The threat didn't need blood to be terrifying. It only needed patience, and the Gong family had built an empire on exactly that. If you were Lizzie, and you found out the man you loved had known about your father's debt before you did, would you forgive the silence, or would the secrecy hurt worse than the debt itself? Tell me in the comments. I want to know where you stand before we continue. Lizzie noticed the changes before she understood them. Her scholarship stipend, usually deposited on the first of the month, was suddenly under review. Her mother called from Lagos, voice tight with confusion, saying the hospital had reassigned her to a lower-paying department without explanation. Small things. Deniable things. The kind of things that could be coincidence if Lizzie hadn't already learned, in whispered office conversations, exactly how careful and thorough the Gong family's reach could be. She confronted Gong in the only way she knew how, directly, her voice shaking with something between fear and fury. "My mother's job. My stipend. Is this you? Is this your family?" He didn't lie. He couldn't, not to her, not anymore. "Yes," he said quietly. "I found out days ago. About your father."
About the debt.
"I should have told you the moment I knew." The silence between them stretched long and brutal. "You knew," she said, voice breaking on the word, "and you let me keep falling for you anyway." "I couldn't stop falling either," he said. "I tried. I want you to know that I tried." It wasn't enough, and they both knew it. She turned to leave, and for the first time since the poster, since the rooftop, since every stolen hour that had felt like the safest thing in a foreign country, Gongbin let her walk away without following. Not because he didn't want to, because he didn't yet know how to protect her from a war she hadn't started. The estate summons came a week later, Not a request, an order, delivered through his mother instead of his father, which somehow made it colder. Lizzie was brought to the family compound under the pretense of clarifying the matter of the outstanding debt. She understood, walking through those gates, that she wasn't a guest. She was a settlement being negotiated without her consent. She was placed in a private room to wait. Alone. The door wasn't locked, but it didn't need to be. She had nowhere to go, no understanding of the city well enough to run, no money that hadn't already been quietly restricted. It was there, hours later, that she heard Gong Tae's voice through the door, cold and final. She leaves when the debt is paid, one way or another. And Gong Bin's voice, closer, harder than she'd ever heard it. Touch her, and you'll answer to me.
Not to the family. Me.
This was the moment. The one from the very beginning, the fire she'd been dropped into before she understood how she got there. She pressed her hand to her chest, holding her own heart in place, and realized with sudden, aching clarity. The boy from the poster and the man behind that door had become, somehow, without her permission, the same terrifying, devastating thing. Someone she couldn't survive losing. Inside the study, the real terms were laid out. Not violence. The Gong family didn't need violence when reputation and resources did the work more precisely. Lizzie's mother would lose her position permanently. Lizzie's visa would be revoked within the month, her name flagged in a way that would follow her for years.
Unless
Gong Bin signed the contract in front of him, a formal severing of any connection to Lizzie's visa, witnessed by the family, binding, irreversible. His father slid the paper across the desk. One signature, he said. And her family's debt is considered settled. Sign it, and she walks out of here with her life exactly as it was before you complicated it. Gongbin looked at the paper. Then at the door, beyond which the only person who'd ever made his real name, not the empires, not the families, his sound like something worth having, was waiting to learn what he would choose. His hand hovered over the pen. He didn't sign. Instead, Gongbin stood, pushed the contract back across the desk, and said the words that would end his old life the same way Lizzie's kiss had once ended his loneliness. I won't erase her to protect a name I never asked for. His father's face went the color of stone. Then you understand what you're choosing to lose. I understand, Gongbin said, that I've spent my whole life protecting a family that has never once asked what I wanted. I'm done asking permission to love someone. He walked out of that study without waiting for a response, and found Lizzie exactly where he left her, standing, arms wrapped around herself, eyes red but dry, like she'd already prepared herself to say goodbye. You didn't have to choose me, she whispered. Not like this. Not against your whole family. I didn't choose you against them, he said, closing the distance between them. I chose you because of everything they taught me not to want. Softness.
Honesty.
Someone who makes quiet feel like home instead of loneliness. Her breath caught. And the debt. Debts get renegotiated, he said. Family empires bend, eventually, when the person at the center of them stops being willing to break for it. He reached for her hands, steady now, certain in a way he hadn't let himself be in weeks. I'm not signing you away, Lizzie. Not today. Not ever. She stepped into him, finally letting go of the breath she'd been holding since she first walked through those gates, and for the first time since the poster, since the whispered voice behind her, she let herself believe that maybe survival and love weren't opposites after all. It wouldn't be simple in the weeks that followed. His family's reach didn't vanish overnight, and forgiveness, for a debt years older than either of them, came slowly and only partially, and only because Gongbin refused, again and again, to let it cost Lizzie anything more. But her mother kept her position. Her visa cleared. And Lizzie stayed in Seoul, not as a scholarship intern anymore, but as the woman standing beside a man who'd once been nothing but a poster on her wall, now standing in front of her, choosing her every single day, in a world that had given them every reason not to. Love doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes it arrives disguised as a debt, a danger, a family that would rather lose a son than gain a daughter they didn't choose. What Lizzie and Gongbin found wasn't easy, but it was real, and real is rare enough to fight for. Do you think Gongbin made the right choice, walking away from his family's approval for love? Would you have signed that contract or torn it up like he did? And if you were Lizzie, could you have forgiven the silence, knowing he kept the truth from you to protect you? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next AfroSeoul Connect story. And send this to someone who still believes love is worth the risk. We'll see you in the next one.